Welcome to our screencast on basically everything you need to know about the Electoral College. At the end of this, you will hopefully understand, be able to answer these questions about what is the Electoral College, how does it work, and also what are districts, what's reapportionment, what's redistricting. Secondly, why did our founders create the Electoral College? And then lastly, what are some pros and cons of the Electoral College? So just a quick recap from class. On election day, the people of every state, including Minnesota, come out and vote. And that's called the popular vote, and it must only be won by a plurality, which means that you only need more votes than the next person. So Obama would win Minnesota even if he only had 45.1% of the vote and Romney had 45. Even if it was so close, Obama would get all of Minnesota's electoral votes because it is a winner-take-all system. The number of electoral votes that the state of Minnesota gets is based on the number of districts plus senators. All right, and every state has 2 senators, no matter its size. They all have 2. So the question is, how many districts does the state of Minnesota or any other state have? And the answer is 8. Minnesota has 8 congressional districts. Notice that on the right here, Edina is actually split between districts 3 and 5. If you live in District 5, you have Keith Ellison as your representative. In District 3, you have Eric Paulson as your representative. So each district is about 650 to 700,000 people. And the larger ones up here are this size because of population density. A lot of people live closer together in the Twin Cities, so therefore the districts are smaller. But each district gets around 650 to 700,000 people and 1 representative. So a little bit more about what districts are. You see California's got 53, Montana's got 1. So California therefore has 55 electoral votes and Montana has 3. So what are districts? We have school districts like School District 273, it's Edina. We have area codes for phones. We have precincts and wards for cities, which none of this is stuff that you have to know, but just to illustrate to you that there are a lot of districts and lines on maps. We have state legislative districts. Edina is in Senate District 49 and House District 49A. But most importantly, what I want you to understand is that we have federal districts. Each state has a certain number that's given to them by the national government in Washington, D.C. There are 435 seats in our House of Representatives, and those are divided or apportioned amongst the 50 states. So for instance, every 10 years we do a census, and in that census they determine where population is in the different states and decide how many seats in Congress each state will get. Minnesota, as you see, has 8. And a lot of states on the East Coast and on the West Coast and in the South have many more than some on the upper Midwest. So each district, things you should know, is about the same size in terms of population. Each district has 1 House representative, and there are 435 in the United States. And some rules about districts is they can't cross state boundaries, and each state gets at least 1 district. Now, one of the things you need to understand, as I mentioned earlier, is that districts change over time. Population changes over time. People move within a state, like moving from rural Minnesota to one of the Twin Cities. People move between states, right? After Hurricane Katrina, a lot of people left Louisiana and moved to places like Texas. And immigrants come from other countries. So every 10 years, our government does a census, and each state then redraws their districts. So here's Minnesota's districts in 1962, in 1972, 82, and notice every 10 years the districts are changing ever so slightly until 2012, where we have the current 8 districts that we have today. If you look at the districts in the United States, they also change, and as we added states and moved across the country, starting from the East Coast all the way to the West throughout time, every time we've added states, the districts have changed. Apportionment. This is this idea of looking at the data from a census and then determining which states are losing population and which states are gaining. For instance, in class we talked about how the state of Michigan, if you can see the bar graphs here, their population is declining since the 2010 census, which means that they are losing congressional districts. The state of Minnesota has a population that's growing, however it's not growing as fast as the rest of the country. We barely held on to 8 congressional districts from the last census. States like, you can see here, states like Nevada are increasing a ton in population. Similarly, you see Texas increasing quite a bit in population, mostly due to immigration. So after we look at that, we understand that apportionment is dividing the seats of the House of Representatives amongst the several states, and then redistricting is the states drawing their own district lines. We can understand what gerrymandering is, which is the idea that each state has an incentive because the party that's in charge gets to draw their districts. Each state has this incentive to try and draw districts that benefit their party. This District 12 that I'm outlining here is one of the districts in North Carolina that was infamous for being gerrymandered. Right? It looks like a snake, a serpentine, and it's drawn this way to try and keep certain voters in or other voters out in order to benefit a party. Here's another district in the state of Texas, where again it's drawn in this bizarre shape in order to try and encompass as many Democrats as possible in order to help Republicans get elected. This is gerrymandering. We'll get in more into this at the end of the year, or towards the end of the year, but I really want you to understand it right now because it ties back to the Electoral College. At the end of the day, we understand that Minnesota has 8 districts, and you should understand that's based on our population. So we have 10 electoral votes. So on election day, every state tallies up the ballots in their state, and they decide who they're going to support. This is known as the electoral vote, and this must be won by a majority. So you see the number of states here and the electoral votes that they have, as well as whether they are typically Republican or Democrat or swing states like Florida. All these states add up their votes, and we add up the total number of votes. We see that there are 435 districts in the United States, 100 senators, and keep in mind that Amendment 23 gives Washington, D.C. 3 electoral votes. So there's a total of 538 electoral votes. In order to win, you need a majority of that, 538 divided by 2, which is 269. But getting just above that majority is 270, and that's the magic number that any candidate needs in order to win and become president. Now, something that we talked about in class is that when you vote for president, you are not actually voting for the president, you're voting for electors. So here are 10 electors and 1 alternate from Minnesota. They are all Democrats, and they were chosen by the Democratic Party. And when Barack Obama won the state of Minnesota in 2012, these 10 Democrats were given permission to go vote in the Electoral College. When our founders initially created this system, they created it because they did not trust the average voter to make informed decisions about politics. So they wanted to create a democracy, but also protect against uninformed voters. Therefore, they created these electors that are intelligent, educated, informed citizens, and they're the ones that are actually choosing the president. A long time ago, they used to ride in horses and carriages to Washington, D.C. to cast their ballot, and typically they were supposed to do what the states had asked, but they didn't always have to. Today, that's changed greatly. These electors, instead of going to D.C., simply go to St. Paul at the Capitol, where they cast their ballots in a formal ceremony. And 99.9% of the time, these electors always do what the state has asked or what the popular vote is. They rarely go away from that. Since 1860, I believe there have been 9 instances of faithless electors, which is very few compared to the total number of votes that we've had. The House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. then adds up these votes from these electors, and that determines the electoral vote winner, which becomes the president. For all intents and purposes, though, we know who the winner is going to be well before this because of exit polls on the night of the election. So this is the role that the electors play. It's insignificant anymore these days and mostly just traditional. So we talked about what are some benefits to the Electoral College. All right, what are some benefits that it provides to us today? One, it gives small states a voice. If we looked at this map of the Electoral College based on electoral votes, we talked about how Montana is much smaller than it normally would be, and California is much larger. But if we took away the Electoral College and simply went based on popular vote, Montana would get even smaller and California would get even larger. Another reason that our founders created the Electoral College is that small states like Rhode Island, back when we started our country, wanted a more equal voice to large states. They were afraid of being overrun, so we created this Electoral College system where even though large states get a louder voice, small states still get some choice in the election, and this typically encourages candidates to go campaign in smaller states. A second reason that the Electoral College is typically viewed as a positive thing is that the winner-take-all system encourages candidates to campaign in states that they maybe wouldn't normally, or regions that they wouldn't normally. For instance, a candidate might campaign, we talked about in West Virginia, because even if they win just barely in the popular vote, they get all 5 electoral votes, which could be seen as a big boost. Even though it's only 5 electoral votes, it's certainly worth more to them than going to West Virginia to win only a couple thousand popular votes. The third benefit is it creates continuity. It's what we've done for the last 224 years, and barring a few exceptions, it's worked quite well. Fourth, it protects federalism because it gives states influence over the elections, and this is what our founders wanted. They wanted states to have influence in order to limit the size and the power of the national government. And then lastly, it creates an electoral mandate. It exaggerates the results of any election, like in 2012 when Barack Obama won 332 electoral votes and 206 were for Mitt Romney. That looks like a huge discrepancy. However, the popular vote was only a difference of 5 million. This discrepancy in the electoral vote, though, gives Barack Obama a mandate and allows the government to typically run more smoothly because it gives him more authority to make policies that fit with his beliefs. But there are some problems with the Electoral College, too, that you should understand. Problem one, low voter turnout. And then we talked about all these reasons why people claim that they don't come out and vote, but mostly we focused on number two, the idea that my vote doesn't matter. If someone is a liberal in Texas, the odds of a candidate winning their state are slim to none, and therefore their candidate would get 0 electoral votes, which essentially means that their vote doesn't matter. The second reason is based on the election of Bush v. Gore, where Al Gore won the popular vote by almost 500,000 votes, but lost the electoral vote, thus giving George W. Bush the election. Problem number two, that a popular vote winner can lose the election. Problem number three, if there's no majority winner, if no one wins the majority of the electoral votes, then the House of Representatives has to decide. In 1800 this occurred and Thomas Jefferson was chosen the winner, but most people view this as not a very democratic way of choosing the president. Problem number four, if you look at this map, it's only red and only blue. There are no third parties involved. Because of the winner-take-all system, it's very difficult for third parties candidates to win any type of electoral votes, therefore basically restricting them from having any access to winning an election. And then problem number five, it places a heavy emphasis on battleground states. For instance, because most states are already locked up as either liberal or conservative, candidates really only spend a significant amount of time in certain swing states. Here's an illustration of the amount of money Obama spent on a few states, and here's Romney spending money on those same states. So these are the five problems that the Electoral College creates. And hopefully at the end of this now, you can hit pause and you can think through the answers to these questions. What is the Electoral College? How does it work? Along with how do districts and reapportionment and redistricting work? Secondly, why did our founders create the Electoral College? We talked about 2 reasons. And then also, what are some pros and cons of the Electoral College? We talked about 5 pros and 5 cons that you should understand. If you have any questions, let me know. And then next class, when we jump into this, we'll start to look at some reform proposals, some ways we could maybe change the Electoral College. All right, let me know if you need anything. Thanks.